Welcome back to the Athlete Lab podcast, where we are obsessed with athlete development and everything that goes into it. Today, we're really excited to be joined by Adam Eaton. Adam's a 2019 World Series champion, has celebrated major league career, has coached in college and now the pro ranks, and he's also dabbled in youth hockey coaching. So he's a youth sports parent, professional athlete, professional coach, and we're very happy to have join him today. Thanks a lot, Adam.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Excited to see what you do and everything that you bring to the table. I'm excited to talk about youth hockey to professional sports. It should be a blast.
Awesome, man. Thanks. So let's kind of go back to your upbringing. When did you kind of realize, like were you a multi-sport athlete? When did you realize baseball might be a real paying job for you?
I kind of grew up a little differently. I grew up in kind of the cornfields of Ohio and knew the dream was available, but never had a realization that it was a real thing. Even once I got there, it I was never really satisfied or comfortable or even thought about it as a job, I guess. But going back to my childhood, I played multiple sports. It was whatever was in the backyard that day. It was everything from roller hockey to making soapbox cars to playing backyard baseball, football, it didn't matter the sport. We picked everything up. If it had a stick and a ball, we were playing it. And was able to play three sports in high school. Enjoyed every bit of it. Realistically, I enjoyed basketball out of all of them, but I happened to not be as tall as I probably would have liked to be able to compete at that sport. But was very fortunate enough to go to college for baseball. And even up to probably my sophomore junior year, still didn't know if I was even going to be drafted and be able to make money professionally. And then once I was drafted, it kind of happened pretty quickly to get to the big leagues and got an early contract. And then once I guess I was in negotiations to have a contract early on, I was at that point, I was like, man, I can kind of make good amount of money at this, and this is kind of my career. But up until that point, it was like week to week, month to month, you can get set down, get replaced. And as quickly as it started, it can definitely be taken away because it is so competitive.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love to hear that your childhood was like so many of us that grew up just loving sports, and we didn't grow up in an era where we had the distraction of some of the video games and stuff like that kind of are here now. So I think it's easy for us to say, go outside and play type thing, but like to hear that that's what you did all summer long and you can just play sports. It's good. And to play three sports in high school, like that's incredible. And I'm sorry to hear about your basketball dreams not quite panning out for you.
It worked out all right.
Yeah, yeah. When you like look back at that time where you're in the minors and then making it to the big leagues, and that it's I heard once from somebody, it's getting there's easy, staying there's the hard part. And what were some of the maybe habits that you innately had that worked out, or maybe you learned from a veteran, or you sort of learned on the job that you felt like might have separated yourself and let you stay?
It's a great question. Realistically, I think more what I learned off the field and more what I learned through my preparation was really what stuck out to me, I guess, to make a big impact on me. The game taught you enough. The game really teaches you, baseball is very much a game of failure where the game is going to teach you on a constant day-to-day basis. But, a lot of a lot of older guys, coming up, especially to the minor leagues, get to AAA where you kind of really kind of hit into older guys that have touched the big leagues, that have been to the big leagues, have reached the unknown to all of us youngsters. And then, when they start talking about prehab and routine and, kind of taking care of things before things happen. And as a young guy, you're kind of flying around, you're doing your own thing. You could stay up a little bit later than you wanted to, you bounce back fine. But then, once you got up there and you saw what pros actually were pros, and staying ahead of, your rehab, staying ahead of your sleep schedule, flying from New York to California on Sunday Night Baseball and getting up the next day and trying to hit 95. And then you realize of how important your body is, how important the seeing the schedule ahead of the schedule, and taking care of what you can take care of in the controllables and on the field is a whole nother issue. But I think, that was probably some of the greatest advice I got as a young pup, was to make sure you take care of business off the field, because if you don't, on the field, will become more difficult, and your body's a vessel. And if you don't take care of those things, it doesn't matter how good you are.
Yeah, that is really, really good advice, and it's the valuable message from the players and the minors who got close but didn't stick, and those are the right type of people for an organization. And you see it, you can scatter across every minor league sport. The level right below the big leagues, there's always those key players that are there just for their messaging, and
Hmm.
that's great if you have the right ones. There's others that aren't always given the right messaging, so
For sure.
yeah.
You pick and
Well,
choose. That is always a lot of the battle too, is like what's good information and what's bad information. And I think any great athlete coming up through the minors, you can kind of see the good information or the bad information on and off. But even, sometimes you have to try things out in order to realize what's good and bad too as well.
yeah. So you're mentioning like how you took care of yourself. What would, in the extremes of West Coast to East Coast, or vice versa, and then having to play the next day, what would be like a weekly routine for a player in the big leagues? And let's just say it's 3 games at home and 3 games an hour and a half flight away. What does that week look like, and what are you doing to stay ready to play? In your case, 5 of 6 nights, I'm assuming.
Yeah, we're usually, usually getting 3 off days a month. So our schedule is much different than hockey, and like you said, you have to stay up on that. But if for say a week's time, we're usually at the field around 1 o'clock. When you're really young, it's before 1 for a 7 o'clock game, and most of that time is really dedicated towards your prehab and just foam rolling, stretching, massaging, whatever you need prior to make sure that your body is as good as it possibly can be running up to that point. You have video, you have multiple hitting sessions. You have to eat. If food is incredibly important. And when I first got into the league in 2012, food was just being injected into the landscape that, hey, what you put in your body is what you get out. And now coming back into the game, it is crazy improvements, from different, you know, spices and what they cook with, oils, and from all these different things, from very basic food groups, as well as all the supplements and proteins and all that it's just tremendous. So like I said, if for me a basic day would, say it's a Monday, and say on Friday, Saturday, Sunday we're going from New York to LA. You're getting into the field early, 1 o'clock. You have prehab, probably after you eat. Of course, you get there at 1 o'clock, you eat 1:30, 1:45, you get into the weight room, you're foam rolling, you're doing basic stretches. I'll usually try to do some type of workout prior, just very small, just to activate your muscles, get your muscles firing, get them protecting your joints, protecting your ligaments. And I would go hit around 3. Media would enter the room around 3:45, so I'd get him back. Media needed you, whatever it is. Our stretch is at 4:15 to 4:20, somewhere in there. You see the media, you kind of hit a kind of a cool down right there, and then all of a sudden you come back out, you go onto the field, you fire back up, stretch, throw, full BP. If you're an old guy, you're in the first 2 groups, you're off the field pretty quick. You come back in, you'd hit it, you eat again. Usually I'm eating 4 times typically in a day. You'd eat again right after that. So you're around 4:45 to 5 o'clock. You hit a lull about 45 minutes from there. Before 6 o'clock, I'd eat something again. 6 o'clock to game time, ramp up, game time, come off, and then we'll go down the mountain we go. Now we're trying to shut all the machines down. We're taking supplements and whatever else to cool us back down. One way, shape, or form, we go from Monday, Friday. Usually when you get to Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and you have that back end, you want to start front loading your sleep. Like, get an extra hour. You've got to sleep a little bit longer. So, the real hard thing for us as athletes, especially on a Friday, Saturday night, there's more fans in the stands. There's more energy, which means more adrenaline, which means it's hard to shut down. So and typically with those more impactful games and more adrenaline rush games, you have better games. So extra innings usually will take into a factor, longer at bats, so on and so forth, just longer games in general. More advertising, you can get into all of it. There's always longer games, depending on if you're New York or LA. It's definitely going to be longer. Boston, just depends on where you're at. But you want to front load the sleep, supplemental stuff. There's a lot of wind down techniques that you can do after those games to make sure that you're really trying to get some really good sleep. Caffeine intake. Depends on when it is during the season, but we really are watching our caffeine intake because caffeine has a huge dividends in your sleep patterns. The more you take, we can go all down the science of that. But anyways, watching a lot of that, making sure I can get to bed late that night, because we all know the ramp up period has to do a lot of caffeine and pre caffeine stuff. And then once you start to front load that body wise, really launching down, you got a Sunday night baseball. It's an 8:20 start in New York. It's a 4-hour game because it's Sunday night baseball. You're not getting off, the field till after midnight most likely, and then you're going against the wind for 5+ hours to LA, and you got to hit 95 the next night. It's get as much sleep as you can once you get there, and caffeinate as much as you can because you just took a nice away from it. Now you can front load the caffeine and use it when you can. So there's a lot that goes into it, and we have a lot of really smart people around here that this is none of my intellect. It's just them just preaching to us and using it the best of our ability. But it's the schedule's not for the faint of heart, that's for sure.
Oh, that's it's so interesting to hear that because coming from a hockey background, that one you arrive at 1 o'clock. That's when a lot of hockey players are just laying down for their pregame nap, whether they're on the road at a hotel or at home. That's kind of like a sacred time frame from about 1 to 3. Then and they're eating on those bookends, and then ramping up. So that's really interesting that it's more sleeping in and then getting to the field and preparing, which it's different than what professional hockey is. Well, or at least it has been in the past. I think that the pregame skate and what I think originated from a little bit of a sweated out type of mentality has almost faded away to like sleep is so important. And I'm such a believer in that. And I think that's so good for any youth coach, high school, college coach, parents to hear because athletes need to sleep. I think sometimes we're quick to say, oh, they need to get out of bed and, operate like adults. But in actuality, they need to sleep if we expect them to perform at 7 o'clock or even 4 or 5 o'clock. That's not that natural from a complete day.
For sure. I think, I think they say for us as athletes, as adults, it's like 10 to 12 hours especially when you're over, repeatedness of our athletic, on our feet, 6 to 10, long days, long hours. So we're supposed to get 10 to 12 and it's hard to get, but when you can get it, you have to get it. And when you need it, hopefully you've had it so you can front load it or back load it. So yeah, sleep is incredibly important to shut down the whole body and the mind and to be able to reset quick.
It's awesome. So I want to go back to your playing career because you lived the moment that every kid, I'll say, like in the Midwest for sure, most of the United States and all over the world has thought about is the Game 7 World Series up to bat and hit two runs, right? Like that's kind of it's sort of what you dream up. So, but you had you had a fairly significant injury just prior to that, right? A year or so before that.
Yeah.
So when you go through that injury, and then like talk me through like the mental side of working your way back from that, and then what do you say to yourself when you're walking up the plate in the the bottom nine of the World Series? Like I'm really curious of that self talk. Is it like the movies?
What's interesting is, just like well, we'll go through, the rehab and the injury. Number one is it takes an army to rehab someone when you have reconstruction surgery, you break your ankle, all the whole nine. I've had some impressive human beings in my corner, to first educate me on what's going on, from start to finish to the long grind of rehab. I was non-weight bearing for almost, was it 6 weeks? I was non-weight bearing. So just the whole duration of their psychologist, they're incredibly impressive with how they can display the information that as an athlete I can buy into, trust them, and then to execute it on a day-to-day basis. It was a long rehab. It was tedious, but like I said, the people that I was around there in Washington were just solid of the earth people that came to work every single day, well knowing that I wanted to work too to get back. And it was quite the journey. And then to have a moment like that on the back end of that was very surreal. Because when I first came back, the doctors thought that I wasn't going to be able to, and through the work of the doctors and myself, we're able to put myself into that scenario, which was just awesome. But going up to the plate, honestly, at that moment, I was so daggone tired that everything was moving in slow motion. Um, I think the most pressure that I felt was, just game one, just trying to get a hit and get an address, is like we like to say. It's like once you get a hit in a playoff series, now you have a hit in the World Series, and we don't need to, well, the rest is just continue to work. But to come up in game seven and, have a couple of guys on base. The swing that I had was a hit up the middle, and actually we did the swing we talked about on MLB Network the following spring training. It was all my work that I have put in. Like it was a fastball down and in. I think it was mid to high 90s, and kind of got somewhat jammed up the middle, but it was able to get enough barrel to it and drive in a couple runs. But walking to the plate, my mind's pretty clear. My mind's pretty clear. It's the task at hand. The moment, honestly, even for me, not really believing I'd ever be in that moment, I don't remember really being scared of the moment. I was more of excited for it, and go up there and just have a clear mind and put my approach together, and try to put a good swing on the ball. But like I said, my work came out as a result of that. Having that clear mind. Like I said, I shouldn't have swung at the pitch. It was a ball. But the high inside tee that I always worked, or low inside tee, which is just a very basic drill in baseball that I work on it every single day. As the ball came out of the hand, I said to say no. I literally in my head said no, and my body ended up swinging. Thank goodness. Ended up getting a single up the middle, but it was awesome to be able to turn around first base. And Bogey is my first base coach. Now that I've taken the job that I've had, it was cool to see him because I've given him a call since, with going into this realm. But world of emotion just came out of me. I'm more of a energy guy, not real emotional, yelling on the bases. But at that moment, I knew we had won and kind of pushed it out of reach with especially our bullpen. So a lot of excitement and honestly, 200 and plus games throughout the season that we played of emotion just kind of let out. So it was a special moment.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, there's obviously so much there from crediting all the people around you when you come back from injury, 'cause that's so true. Without the right people around you with the right messaging and, doing their jobs to an elite level, and then you putting the work in. But then to know that the ball that you shouldn't have swung at was something you've been working on to do what you had to do to get a run, to get a base hit at that time, is there's a lot of good messages there. So that's awesome. It kind of leads me into what I'm really always fascinated when you go from like playing at that level. And I think that there's some sort of misconception that you played, you can coach, you can step right in and do something, or even that you'd want to coach. And then if you do get into the coaching, like how well you adjust to it. And so talk me through that a little bit when, I know you have a family, you're deciding, all right, I'm done playing. Like, how has that been? And then how is you've done a really good job, and people in Michigan State rave about you, and like, how has that whole transition been? And what have you learned since then?
Well, retiring from the game is extremely hard. I think the perspective on it is that you have this career, you make money, and then when you retire, it's like you just go off and play golf every day. As a professional athlete, you're extremely driven. You're extremely organized. You love structure. You love routine. You love to be told where to be, and then you can add your own little bit to it. My entire schedule's been online for the past 17 years of my life, and then to come home and not have the schedule online, creating my own structure, creating my own habits, and creating all this new things that I think you want to do, and you're not really working towards anything. It's very difficult. But Michigan State was awesome. You know, I was able to go to a hockey golf event, and Jake Boss was there, which Jake recruited me to Eastern Michigan. So it kind of, you know, I was up there because my brother-in-law Zach Osborne played at Michigan State, so I was up there, and he said, "Hey, what are you doing?" I'm like, "Dude, I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm trying to survive right now. I'm been dropped out of a boat where there's nowhere to swim, and I just want to go do something." He said, "Well, come help." I'm like, "Yeah, I'll come help." And he's like, "Yeah, we'll figure out a position for you. Just come help." So I was like, "I only talked to my wife, but it sounds like I would like to do it, you know, and it'd be fun. Yeah, I love Michigan State, so I'll go." And you know, the next day called him after talking to Katie, and he's like, "Yeah, we'll make you head of player development. You know, there's no money here, but you can come." I'm like, "Dude, I just want to volunteer. I want to be around the boys, I want to be around baseball, show up to practice." And it has been such a blessing for me. You know, for me, I had my notions of what a college athlete in today's scenario would be like, and I could not have been more wrong. Everybody at Michigan State for the 3 years that I was there was top notch. Kids are just saw the earth. They wanted to work, wanted to win. They were proud to be Spartans, and I really enjoyed my time there. Um, like I said, I wouldn't trade anything for the world with that. So, it's been a blast. But now, you know, getting into the Angels is a completely different scenario for sure.
When I had a very similar experience at Michigan State in the coaching realm, and Jake happened to live in the neighborhood we lived in. When I was up there, he's such a good, like a salt of the earth person, and how you explain his program, it doesn't surprise me at all because that's the type guy he is. And the kids, I like kids these days, people like to say, and like they're really driven. They're far more educated and dedicated. I think that when athletes, when I was in college in the late '90s, and yeah, so I think that that's great for you to have that perspective too, coming out of pro to see kids like that. When you get to the majors, then after watching, you know, the differences. I mean, people like to say that, you know, it's a game of inches as far as, you know, what the difference is from an elite college player to someone in the major leagues. Like, what do you see as separators? And let's take just innate talent out of it. Like, what are the other separators that maybe like players, a contributing baseball player in the Big Ten to that doesn't do or doesn't have and isn't able to make it in the majors versus one that is? What do they have?
For me, I think the biggest thing is making adjustments. I think if you can set your hat on one specific thing, it's being able to make adjustments quickly, like from pitch to pitch, or from in hockey, from shift to shift, to week to week, to month, to season, to year. Whether that is your strength and conditioning, whether that is as you age, changing things up. If you're a freshman in high school or in college and you go to your sophomore year, making adjustments on the field, off the field, anywhere in between. And the guys for me that may not be able, maybe they're talented, but don't quite get to that is because those adjustments that aren't able to be made. You know, I'll give you a perfect example. You know, we have guys on, say, even back when I played, not the current team, but I had guys on my team that there were more talented players in the minor leagues easily. But what those guys knew and what they did was the adjustments they were able to make in order to get the most out of their talent. They were able to make these adjustments in the weight room as they age, 35, 36 years old, make those adjustments in order to stick around, maybe do a little bit less, you know, draw it back a little bit. Maybe they weren't as fast, so they figured out how to be more efficient. Maybe they couldn't hit the ball as far, so then they had to be smarter at the plate. Maybe defensively, their steps weren't as quick, so then they had to know the hitters and the pitchers and the catchers and knowing where the ball is going to be more actively. Where for me, guys that are really, really talented, maybe in college that get to the minor leagues or maybe in college or the AHL or whatever, typically it's those guys that can't quite make those pinpoint adjustments and short durations, long-term durations, and year durations in order to be more educated overall, just be an incredibly smart player and get the most out of their ability, even if they're not the more talented guy. they're less talented, but they're able to kind of squeeze the lemon, so to speak, and be able to stick around longer, especially in the big leagues. There's probably 2 to 4 guys on every team right now that are talented on the grand scheme of things, but they find ways through adjusting their whole programs on field, off field in order to just be the best. And that's even being a good teammate. How do you be a good teammate? How do you be consistent in the room? All those things are just making adjustments.
Yeah, that's the adjustments. It reminds me so much of I had the pleasure of working for Julian Reeswa in Tampa, and he was just so set on having a growth mindset. It was look for players with a growth mindset. As a staff, we needed to have a growth mindset. And it was just that thought process of you're trying to make adjustments. Like how we've always done it may be good, but might not be. And that has always stuck with me. And, that's exactly what you're saying, be able to make adjustments, thinking, all right, well, is this right? Can I get a little bit better? And that's really good. Like, how do you articulate that to a player now? You have, you guys are in spring training now. You see someone who needs to make adjustments. Have you come across anyone that maybe is like really a sponge for it and is able to pick it up quick versus somebody that, as you talk to them, they're not quite getting it. And those are, I think they call it the joys of coaching.
Yeah, well, that's why that's called the joys of coaching, because it's extremely hard. It is. It's hard. It's hard for me as a coach to um, find unique ways in order to communicate to players for them to make their adjustments, whether you make it their own idea, whether you just tell them straight up, whatever it is. The best way that I've learned in the short duration, college is easy because college, being a professional athlete, you kind of have that in. But now that I'm back in the professional ranks as a former professional, I still have some clout there, but it's not nearly the same. Colin Bogey, our first base coach of the Nationals, Colin Brett Butler, a number of different guys that have a lot of invested in baseball and a coach for a long time. They said trust is the number one area for you to be able to have these guys make adjustments or suggest adjustments, and they will trust you in order to make those adjustments. Because if the player doesn't trust you as an individual, when you get on them or when you suggest something that might offend them, they'll shut you down. But if they love you, they trust you, and you bring it up because they know out of the goodness of your heart that you're trying to make them better, then you're in. And you can formulate these really solid relationships, and then you can tell these guys, hey, try this, try this, try this. And then all of a sudden they try it, it goes well. They try it, it doesn't go well. They try it and it goes well. And then all of a sudden you start to create that rapport where this guy will come to you and want more. Hey, what do I got here? What do you think here? And all of a sudden the conversation starts. But I feel like sometimes you run into a dead end, because if guys don't quite trust you as an individual or as a coach, they're not really going to be willing to kind of lay their career on the line to change something that they think is right. So it makes it extremely difficult.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring up it's talking to a college player with having the career you've had is one thing, but then when you're talking to somebody else who, even though they haven't been in the league as long as you have, or were, you still have to prove it to them a little bit. And I always loved and still love working with athletes who make you prove it. I remember like conversations with Spencer Knight as a teenager playing for Team USA, and you'd give him something and he'd be like, all right, explain it. Like he'd shake his head if he didn't buy it, but if he bought it, he's like, all right, explain it. He was always thinking another level, and those are what the good ones do.
And I love that. For me, being here with Anaheim and so far, even as a coaching staff, you're in the midst of a coaching staff. You're learning different individuals within the coaching staff, and everybody has their own perspective on how the game is supposed to be played. There's a million plays, just like in hockey and baseball, bunt defenses and cuts and relays, and you could name an infinity. I mean, there's so many different scenarios. And so far, it has been so amazing to have elite thinkers and elite adjusters in a room. We've had, decisions where not everyone's on the same page, and we go into the room and we have discussions and well, why is this? And we'll more or less just brainstorm, voices will get raised a little bit, but then the end of it, everyone's like, you know what? That's a better way to do things. I like that. You guys have proved to me that this is the right way. And we'll go forth with that way. And then, vice versa. Today, I'm in the car ride home and we had a first and second late in the game scenario. And you know, John Gibbons is coaching the big leagues for a long time, has been in baseball for 40 years. He was in Toronto for forever when they were in the playoffs. And so he's in the back seat and he said, what do you disagree with? And I said, well, I don't know if that scenario right there, if we would do that. I don't know. That's just giving up. And he said, well, what do you think of this? And he gave me something. And I'm like, you know what? You're right. Like that, my way doesn't work. And he says, yeah, well, I like the way you're thinking, but if this, and this happens, then all of a sudden you have guys that come together, and it's no different for, again, players. If you have these certain players that you trust, and I trust, Gibby, as we call him, through and through because of who he is and what he's about. And so it's like, I learned something today just as quick as you can snap your fingers, but you have to be open and honest, and have to be willing to learn. Once again, trying to get players to want to be able to do that. It's a blessing and a curse, and it's a challenge that all of us coaches have.
Changing gears a little bit, but on that topic, something that I'm such a huge believer in is, you mentioned earlier, all the things off the field is, athletic training that isn't sport specific: strength, speed, agility, balance, coordination. And that's something that in youth sports, you have to convince players and families and coaches to prioritize, because they want to believe that practice and more games is the only way to get better, when, like the things that go on in a gym or the like environment most likely are going to pay more dividends than that one extra practice, or for sure one more tournament, that type of thing. So what are your thoughts on that? With you have children who are athletes, you've seen all these people come up. Like, where do you stand on kids doing off ice training or off field training at certain ages?
Well, Phil, you're going to laugh at me, but this is where I'm going to lean on you because you are way more experienced than I am in that fashion. I don't have much of an opinion, and the reason I don't right now, and it's hazy for me, and I'm excited to learn from you and discuss this further. I'm glad my two boys are in your organization so they can learn from this. From my own personal growing up, I didn't lift a weight till high school. And that was the reason, is because we were just surrounded by cornfields. You just went out and played and had a good time. And I got to high school, and the only reason I lifted a weight was because it was part of the school program. It was better than, I don't know, taking knitting or something. And I was like, you know what, I'll lift a couple weights. From my aspect of things, and again, I'm willing to learn from you, and I don't know if this is what you want to hear, but I always felt hungrier when I got to college lifting weights. And the reason was because it was really, really fresh in my mind. I hadn't done it. I was so green when I was doing it. So when I would go to the weight room, I was fired up to get in there. I was fired up to work out hard and get stronger. And I think that's maybe why I was such a late bloomer too, is because I felt like I had a lot of gains. I came into Miami of Ohio at 135, and after my sophomore year, I was 185. So it was like I said, I never lifted a weight. So I just kind of was whatever I put in my body, went to the dorm, the dining halls, and was lifting weights and eating weights. And I gained a lot of weight. So that's maybe why I was a late bloomer too. But like I said, that's why I want to lean on you. And I know that you're very passionate about it, but I don't know from my experience if I'm the right guy to ask, to be honest with you, but I'm willing to learn, and I'm willing to listen to the experts. That's for sure.
Yeah, I appreciate the honesty, and it's a great perspective, because that is, true multi-sport athlete. And then you get to college and you're, I don't want to say forced, but you're in that environment where it's there, it's readily available. You have good coaches and you do it. And I'm more of I would love to say that I was training relentlessly when I was 10, 11, 12, 13. I wasn't. I was the same. I got to college, and I got drafted after my freshman year. I really didn't start working out till then, as a 19-year-old, like truly working out. It's a massive regret on my part. Spending the last years that I have with USA Hockey in Tampa and Detroit, and you spend a lot of time in Europe, and you're at a rink to watch a junior game, and you're seeing their youth hockey, and they're training. Their 10-year-olds are training. They're out there. They're after games in the rain. Their national team is doing training in the middle of November, in the middle of February. And then we look at the players that come out of, say, Finland, and there's 50,000 players in that country, and they're winning gold medals against, where countries that have 600,000 players, 800,000
Yeah.
players. So, and I just can't help but draw a correlation between how strong as skaters they are, and like those type of things. And there, we've all seen the stories on the Russians and, how hard they train. Well, I've only seen that a little bit inside of Russia, but it is happening. So I just I put a high precedent on, and it's not necessarily the weights. It's agility, it's jumping, it's
Yeah.
speed development, athletic speed development that I think is so important. And you touched on the length of a day in the majors.
Mhm.
Just the idea of your sport being an hour and 10 minutes on the field or the court or the rink. Well, let's make that sport 2 hours, and you're going to do 40 minutes of off the field training to make you a better athlete before. And that little bit incrementally over your youth career is going to make you a healthier person, stronger athlete for sure, and maybe increase your chances of advancing in the sport that you're playing.
It makes sense. I mean, especially if you have specialized, if you have one individual or two individuals or half the team that is only hockey only, they're still getting that athleticism with the box jumping, the agility, whatever it may be, and then vice versa for the guys that do multiple sport athletes, they're still getting some strength conditioning, reaction time, movements, and it's like I said, it's the workouts that my 9-year-old now, going to be 10 next year is doing. It looks like fun. It looks like they're on the playground, but they're doing light stuff. They're doing movement. They're doing reaction time. They're doing a lot of cutting. Feeling out their body awareness in space. I think it's really good stuff.
Yeah. And I think we could all be mildly cynical and say, well, that's what we did in the schoolyard or in the street or whatever,
Yeah.
and that's probably true, but it's also, I just like the idea of that. And I was always so enamored, and I bring up Finland and Russia as I was in Russia one time, and it's a rainy, crappy day in November, and the Finnish national team before the game is outside in the hotel parking lot doing plyos. And, as a very proud American, I was like, well, I wonder why that team is beat us last year. Like that's
A
so
little bit of struggle goes a long way too, though. A little bit of struggle goes a long way. Those guys, they got something to play for too. That's definitely a
yeah.
part of it too. But that's
Also,
awesome.
yeah, that's true. That's true. And believe me, mate, I'm very proud of how our teams ended up this February. That's for
That's
sure.
true. Heck
So
yeah.
yeah, that's cool. Well, hey man, I appreciate you taking the time. Wish you all the best with the season coming up. I know it's gonna be exciting to be back in it, and I'll be following along. You got a aside from me playing the Old English D, you got a fan out here, so
I love it. We'll be in town, I think, May. So yeah, we'll be in town. Be nice to sleep in my own bed for a couple nights, that's for sure. But hopefully we'll take a few from them. But at the same token, like I said, hopefully Detroit can have a good year this year. So
yeah, awesome, awesome. Well, yeah, thanks again. I appreciate you being on this, and look forward to staying in touch.
thanks, Phil.